government's all worried about the lone wolf. We have to be worried about lone crickets. Each one of us making the din of silence against something that we are supposed to speak up against. There's just simply that point. It's fascinating to watch really people don't respond, and then more importantly, watch how people respond in the wrong ways. And I say that maybe sounds a little judgmental, like I know the way, but I'm talking about the ways I've seen work much, much better. In fact, acting at all in the right direction can be provable, and yet I see nobody even attempting that, not knowing all the ways that might be successful. I suspect there's just oodles and gobs of ways to be successful if we just engage, and that's really the secret. And trying to make a sense of this, I don't know, it's just senseless to me at some level. Why we would watch this unfold before us and allow those that have planned your future, our future, to take control and have their way with us, in particular now that we know we've been duped. I mean, this is the big deal. It's a big jump to finally come to the point when you realize you've been duped. And then a little bit more difficult, but not impossible at all, to figure out in certain ways. And then at some point the tsunami of deception unfolds before you, and you have to decide to get on that wave and surf it or succumb to it. It's almost that drastic. But what came to mind was a gentleman's work way back in, I think, 1967 that I want to maybe broach to people. And this is where they have us, it seems. A gentleman named Martin Seligman in 1967 did a study. I always find interesting how the common vernacular changes and moves into certain things to give us indication of what we're recognizing in ourselves that we might really be. And this word, a dog, it came out, D-A-W-G, D-A-W-G, came up. I thought that was kind of interesting. That kind of correlated to what this little experiment showed about why we're crickets. And it's telling at one level, and it's sad at another. And again, sometimes it may sound like I'm judgmental, but it's really not. I mean, I realize we have a big deal to do, and we better do it. And it's astonishing to me that we don't. And so then I wonder why, and I get a little frustrated. It kind of came out this week, Friday, on our mining association meeting, not the district meeting, but the association meeting. People just aren't responding. And I'm there like I'm here, asking people to participate. And I offer ways that can be done, that at least from what we've been doing would be helpful. Anybody throwing in would help at this point, and just about everywhere, actually. But this little study was done in 1967. Failure to escape a traumatic shock, and it seemed to be kind of roll us up into the animal they treat us as, that we need to escape from. That they treat us as an animal, and we respond as an animal. As long as we respond as an animal, they will control us. They are going to, the ubiquitous whoever is doing this and continues to control the things in your life and your environment. And I don't mean the trees, I mean the way your social structure is set up, and who's going to come and get in your face, and who's going to be protected to do that, and you not saying much about that, just accepting it. When normal sanity would say you would respond, and natural law says you will respond or you have to respond, one or the other. I'll just read the summary of this beginning to remind you what this was about. Dawgs, only this is spelled D-O-G-S. They actually used an animal instead of the one that we call ourselves, D-A-W-G, the same dog, it seems to me. It's all the slang vernacular. It seems pretty interesting to me that's consistent. Dawgs, which had first learned to panel press in a harness in order to escape shock, subsequently showed normal acquisition of escape avoidance behavior in a shuttle box. In contrast, yoked inescapable shock in the harness produced profound interference with subsequent escape responding in the shuttle box. Initial experience with escape in the shuttle box led to enhanced panel pressing during inescapable shock in the harness and prevented interference with the later responding in the shuttle box. Inescapable shock in the harness and a failure to escape in the shuttle box produced interference with escape responding to a 7-day rest. These results were interpreted as supporting a learned helplessness. A learned helplessness explanation of interference with escape responding. SS failed to escape shock in the shuttle box following inescapable shock in the harness because they had learned the shock termination was independent of responding. So we're apparently that I can justify what crickets is. It's this certainly in the face of natural law saying we would respond otherwise as men and taking the responsibility for ourselves. We are really succumbing to our animal nature and learned helplessness to not respond, to make excuses to not respond, to whatever reason you make up to not respond is your acceptance by apparent learned helplessness. I want to call our attention, the dogs that we are, the animal that we might be, that we can move to, I think. I think that's part of the deal, is we have to move and ascend ourselves into a better consciousness, a better awareness, and a better response to these things. And this world essentially is that test. That's the real experiment. It's on and over in a long-term time. We see the hands of that control structure everywhere and repeated. It's part of how I can respond to things almost immediately. That the pattern, the methods, the conditions are set up identical over and over in tons of different ways. They're just using different elements to do the same thing. I've just identified again for some people we're working on some projects. I just said, listen, you're dealing with the same thing. Here's the points. Here's the dots you can connect, and then look at it in this regard, and you'll see it's identical to this method they used 20, 30 years ago. They're doing it again, right here in front of everybody, and no one sees it. And no one responds to it. That this thing is transparent to us. No different than the battle that's not physical is transparent to our three-dimensional sense here. And we get this learned helplessness, apparently, and we become crickets. So, maybe for me, just to give me a little bit more distance on this thing, I can go a few more weeks as I watch people not respond correctly or fail to respond or make excuses for responding. Again, to me, it's really become really simple. Find a wrong you need to make right. Another was do right. Do what's right. It takes a better awareness, a bigger consciousness to do this. I'm not talking new agey stuff here. I'm talking physical, get back in the face of someone who's oppressing you or repressing you or dominating you. You have to respond. I'm not saying you have to respond in a violence. You certainly would possibly have to use a force, even if it's the force of will. In other words, intangible things. So, otherwise, you get stuck in this, what they call it, the identification of the Matrix. The Matrix is not a movie. That was clear to me. So people with better awareness at the time than I had, I had it, I could recognize it, but was able to put that in a communication style to people. The movie, The Matrix, which is not a movie, it's explaining something. It's explaining quite a bit. It doesn't mean it's 100%, but I just tell you, when you understand what that's really telling you, you understand the control structure you're in, that's your notice that you have to step up or be the dog that we say we're slang called DAWG, or the dog in Seligman's experiment. Learned helplessness. And we will justify that helplessness by any means. I hear it all the time in lots of ways, in lots of places. Everyone finding their comfortable spot not to respond. So, a lot of people don't like to hear me say that, and they take offense, and I understand that condition as well. Because I don't talk about it in a judgment. I have no real judgment about us. We're in a serious way, and we have to cut through all of our limitations. We have to cut through all of the prejudice that we have on us. We have to cut through our own disabilities. We really have a ton of work to do, but it's really all making that choice to do it. Focusing on something that is wrong that you need to make right is the most simplest way I can convey to you how to be your own stick in the spokes of the wheel of the system that's been set up for you to accept. Before, and again, I start all this other thing, going on a different track, but I was able to periodically hear Ron earlier on UCY.tv. He broadcasts 2 hours, I think, before my broadcast here. And he was making a comment about we're born in as children and maintained as children, and that's somewhat the truth. Now, I don't want to disregard what he's telling you there. What I want to point out, though, is as a question, why would you think then that applications are necessary if you are in a child state, in a state of ward of the state condition, and that never changes? What's an application for? And you're going to start to see there. Now, I just want to bring your awareness. They have you in this child ward of the state condition. You have a confessor against you and your mother, which didn't understand all this. They have us duped big time. We can go through a lot of that, and I don't get too much into other people's work. I can just point out in different ways. There's a great probability, more than a possibility, that this is going on. But why are you having to do certain things, like, in fact, application, if you're always deemed to be subject, and you're always being deemed to be under the state's control, and always deemed to be subject to the, as he said it, the rules, as said for the highway, the hall, rules of the hallway, your social norms, then why are they needing your consent? And I want to just point that out. I want you to add this idea, why they need your consent, on what he was saying earlier, which was that you're subject to this system that's been laid out for you. Because I want you to understand you're not helpless. Make it look like it's helpless. You get shocked every time you attempt to do what you ought to do. And I wanted just to allow you to figure out this on your own. Don't work yourself into a state of helplessness in your mind. It's not so easy. As the gentleman last week, I can't remember his name, I think his name was Tom Hayden, maybe? I hope I have that right. You learned what he went through. You learned one of the ways that it happens to you, and you go and take this responsibility on and address those people, which Ron actually identified as well as I do, is in the Bar Association. Fundamentally and foundationally, it is the control central organization. In fact, that becomes most of the discussions I have anymore, is trying to find out how they're not involved with destroying our way of life. Actually, it's really pretty pervasive that you have to step up to defend yourself, and you need to. I'm trying to figure out a way for myself to accept a little bit more by people are crickets, and then explain to you why you might be a cricket. Why are you making the excuse, whatever that excuse is, to not engage? I don't know about all that. All I know is I find myself engaged, I guess, and I know that while we're engaged, what we're doing is really having an effect. It seems like molasses sometimes, but it does work. And while we're working against this thing that we were born into, and we see what ought to have happened, and we can strive for that, we're just writing our future by our work today. And so if we have no plant the seed, we're told, as we don't sow the seed today, we can't expect a harvest, can we? We can certainly expect weeds in our patch, but we're not going to be able to see the future, given that we conceive of one. And if you don't conceive of one, I'm sad for you, because I don't know what else we would do without some sense of accomplishment, awareness, learning, awareness gaining, consciousness expansion, all that stuff. Just getting another grasp on this prison that we're born into. What is that all about? Why do you have a couple things and those things cannot be transgressed? Why don't we rely on those things as our shield, if you will, our defense? Your consent is still required, even if I can show you how Ron is correct about the childlike nature. I tell you this all the time, and the definition of child is a ward of the state. A parent is a custodial agent of a ward of a state. It's not men or women. It's not sons or daughters. It's not mothers or fathers. It's these legal terms set up by a legal fiction of controllers, puppet masters, I guess you can call them. But these are people that just prey, another religion, prey upon you and your either ignorance, or they keep you there, or your inaction to defend yourself. And what they've set up is a whole bunch of nonsense that we can buy into. Again, it's public buy-in. You heard William Roberts talk about it all the time. That's the new normal. Listening to Ron talk about this is the normal. This is what's normal now. And my observation was, well, just tell them, well, my pink house, you want to paint it all blue, I'm going to make mine pink, and that's the new normal. Get over it. Protect that. Do your duty. I don't want to know about your job. Here's the property law, and this is what is law. And this is what you're going to recognize, or you're a felon in the capacity, official capacity, diminishing my property. That's my contribution to all this. Not just that you write or complain, but you turn the tables on these criminals. And you learn how that is. It's really not that difficult. It's taken a long time for me to get here, but you don't have to suffer all that. I tell you little tidbits of it everywhere during my broadcasts. Or anybody gets involved and wants to discuss things with me, I can kind of guide you pretty quick to the trailhead that you can go look for and find quickly yourself. And I listen very carefully to what I tell people and how they respond to find out, is it making sense to them? When they do the research, are they finding it? I'm not here to talk about nonsense. We are in a real war. We don't have time to mess around. We don't have time to shoot blanks. We don't have time to target practice. Because the other side's working quick on fictions, on things to get you wrapped up that keep you destabilized, that keep you off balance. You always have to keep balance, remember, in all things. That's the best way to go about it. If I didn't learn that in gymnastics long time ago, boy, I probably didn't learn anything. Center of gravity. Response. Partly why I tend to like the Aikido response of responding to someone and using their own errors, their own ignorance, their own weight, the weight of their existence against them. And it's a lot easier to do that when you're standing in what is more right. And I get cautious about saying what is right. I think we know that instinctually what is truly right. There's no definition for that. But in the scheme of things, there's always these hesitations that you kind of need to look carefully at. They have this whole structure before us, and they tell you that's an authority, as Grimner would say, authorita. It's not just people. It's in the illusion that we hear this all the time. I've talked about it behind the woodshed on being careful on how you get this happening, how they use this little technique against you. And here we have they have the dog that becomes learned helplessness. You become the dog to learn that helplessness, and what they bring against you is another dog to snoof out your criminality. And then you find out, as we all knew, and you got to wait so much time to find it. It's not like common sense rules first. It's like, no, legal has to come in and tell you what to do because you didn't step up and challenge it in the first instance. That the drug dogs here, these canines, have now been found out to alert nearly every time. Now, who'd have thunk it, right? We all knew this, but see what it took was someone stepping up and putting the argument in. Why? I don't know. This should have never come here. We should have never tolerated it about this, but we have. And that system of controllers tries to make it reasonable to you, and they have these ways of making it look reasonable. This question about these canines has always been a question. They've never been able to bring the courts will not presume a canine is probable cause. That's a notice to you. That means that's not a test that they can rely on, that they think that you're going to rely on if they keep doing it to you that way. And we all know that the dog is going to respond, like in the learned helplessness, they'll respond to the reward as well. It takes nothing to trigger a dog to do something once they've been triggered to do that, told to do that, because they're going to have some kind of reward. What's your reward, folks? What benefit do you get in the system to keep you quiet? You really have to look at some of this thing. But police are now speaking out about a decision from the Seventh Circuit United States Court of Appeals, which ruled that drug dogs signal for drugs nearly every time they are sent out sniff which ruled that drug dogs signal for drugs nearly every time they are sent to sniff a vehicle or home. This decision shows that the police dog searches are not legitimate and that they are just used as a pretense for officers to violate the rights of innocent people. You use these words, folks, but pretense. You come in and you say, that's if you ever get tied up, you use this case, you say these drug dogs were used as a pretense. I would go one step further. I would charge felony and fraud to assert such, to gain their jurisdiction over me in a criminal sense. Remember, I've suggested to you just as much as I can, theft by extortion is essentially and simply coming under some color of authority to interfere with your rights, property, remedies, or life. Or giving those rights, remedies, property to a third party that doesn't have right to them. When I read that first sentence, when I see pretense, I see color of law imposition on your rights. That's a felony. They use this to take you down wrongly. They don't have a right to do that. They didn't have a right to use that dog against you, and then they did to get you into the jurisdiction that'll beat you up. And we remain crickets on these things. No one ever brought this to our attention. I'm not saying that when you do, you win. I'm saying that you at least now have a backbone to step up and point at everybody in a room, everybody who's doing something, and say, you're all felons, and you don't have to cringe because you just said it. They're criminals. They're felons. And you've got them. And then you watch the circus that goes, you think you're in a circus court, kangaroo court when you get in it. Watch what happens when you allege they're doing fraud. You watch what goes on in that now. So here's the proof, folks, that these dogs, if you've had an inkling, if you've ever heard of someone got busted or got drug dogged on, and you didn't know what to tell them or they didn't know how to defend themselves, here it is, folks. That this court case, and I won't read more, but to tell you the conclusion mostly, that the justice observed in this that the drug dogs were not much more than flipping a coin, maybe worse. It's all to make it look like there's an authority. There's all the authority to get you involved, and we remain helpless in our minds against this condition of crime. We don't call it out. And they're the big dog, you little dog. You little learned helplessness little dog. And this is how this thing, dog-eat-dog world, happens and works. And you can be I got a little thing here now, just occurred to me. I got a little postcard I've had for years and years. Years and years. You can't run with the big dogs if you pee like a puppy. In this dog-eat-dog world, folks. Are you going to pee like a puppy? Or are you going to start to step up? Are we going to go ahead and learn how these people have this fiction, this illusion around us, and answer the question why it is they need to get your application, how you stick it to yourself, and how they maintain control when you don't, and how they maintain control if you do, but that when you do stand up against this, they come and answer why, and that without one they have no authority, and without any they don't have a way to attach you, and to do so is a crime on their part. And know a little bit more than what I'm telling you in summary right now, to say, to support, and prove. Not very much more, actually. Because they have their ways to try and get out. You got to plug the holes the rats leave on, to give them justification. That you will have a better position as we move into this new normal that they have for us. So police dogs, we knew it, but here it is. How many reports, car stopping reports, that they've brought on, And now the police are howling. Why are they howling, folks? Because this was the scam. And the test now, this court case became the test of the legitimacy of that evidence as probable cause to make the continuation of the state's involvement. It's another type of application. On the idea of being, you're vulnerable on the highway, which I've told you, if you go from the highway use statute on the grant, they can't apply this commercial stuff to you. Unless they have probable cause to believe that you're in commerce. And guess where you gave them all that? Is when you put a license plate on your car and you had a sticker that's current. The sticker only says that you're current. That's all it does. The license plate's only to hold that dang sticker. Or you hand them a driver's license that says you're driving for some company. Happens to be your own company. You don't go look at the documentation that says, no, even service, you don't have to file accident forms if you're not even in a service job only and not hiring for commerce. You go look very carefully at what the state already knows that it denies. Here's the other side of that felony I'm telling you about. Theft by extortion is not just a conduct, it's an omission to do something that you had a duty to do. In other words, you were supposed to follow the law as an official, and when you came after me and you didn't honestly state the law, or you misstated it, or you omitted, more importantly, to state the law that would have shown that you weren't possibly subject to that authority, that is a felony. You have to go to your state statutes nonetheless. That's the occupiers revising what was law, substituted for the permanent laws of the people, and the law nonetheless that they are given license to follow through like any other military ruler occupying your territory. Just follow that. It has to be in there. Why? Because they can only change these laws over time, and you watch them do that. In fact, I just noticed there's a constitution that actually, a state constitution that actually states in the constitution that prison profit is to be made to pay for the prisons. They've actually constitutionally allowed the prison industrial complex to be rightful in a state. And so there's your indication, folks, of where it's all going. They've justified adding thieving your time on top of it. On top of your incarceration, they've thieved your time, and you agree to that when you go in. They get us to put these things on our cars, in our hold, in our pocket. They get us to apply these things to ourselves. And since they're occupying force, and most people don't understand how to address a lot of this, and even when you do, it's kind of difficult, except you have a much better position to stand on, and you get them in this felony, and now they got a little bit of trouble. So you don't have that when you walk in and say you were charged with a crime, and you go, oh, okay. Instead of saying, yeah, well, that crime is a fraud and a colorable fraud that's trying to take a property right from me, and that's a felony. So you want to look at this judge, or you want to agree to the accessory. Now I'm going to run over to federal law now because I'm going to have to tell someone else because that's a 18 U.S.C. 4 felony, but you're also now an accessory at 18 U.S.C. 3 of the felony. No, does that mean I win? Well, no, but I sure got a nice record started right after they open their mouth, don't they? Why? Because they transferred the authority that they didn't have on me and made me obligations and duties that I didn't have. Now, why do they need that application? I've talked about this years and years and years and years ago. And I talked about it periodically. I wanted to kind of keep it going. You know it's there to be done. That's not the only way, but there's a lot of different ways they apply. There's presumptions, which are fraud also, and crime. You just need to start learning what those are and call them out. But drivers beware, the costly, deadly dangers of traffic stops in the American police state. Another John Whitehead article, which I think you need to read. I'll give you the link, post-production blogcaster page. It'll be all the links, all the content that I pull from is here. You can get it yourself and read it. I don't see that a lot of people do that. You really need to see the words. Not that you need to even follow his opinion, but there's certain subject matters that they talk about that I find important. The deadly dangers of traffic stop. Traffic is commerce, folks. 18 U.S.C., 28 U.S.C., Section 31, and I think 10. Just go look. It's a federal thing. Trafficking. Put this together, folks. Trafficking. When we talk about sex trafficking, well, you got commerce trafficking. And yet, there's a class of people that aren't doing that. And the governments recognize that, but the judiciary and the Bar Association condition won't allow won't allow that in you. I've talked to you about my friend, and we understood this thing years ago, and we understood the status that you have to have is that named person. You have to be a person subject to the law, and the simple question to the cop on the stand, which was set up at the time of the first contact, that's where you got to set this up, was simply, am I a man? And the upshot that was when the officer finally agreed that my friend was a man on testimony in a traffic court case, the judge interfered. He's committing a felony right here, but he interferes anyway, and he goes, I know where you're going with that, and if I allowed that testimony from the cop into the record, we couldn't prosecute anybody. Think about that. A status is what the only difference between you being subject and not, and this felon in the black robe would not let evidence in the court that would prove that. So we have the answer. That jurisdiction cannot extend outside of person liableness. It also is a condition when you're in that they won't allow the evidence to show that there's no liability. And if we had more people seeing that, I think we would start to we would win the day eventually here pretty quickly. They cannot deal with men. When you step up to make the evidence in their so-called court, their kangaroo court, that's the status that you are. You don't need all this nonsense, I guess is the other thing. You don't need all the things I see everyone saying you got to fill all this stuff out. All you need to do is get the evidence on the record of a certain status that's not subject to the jurisdiction because there was no application. You ask for the status to be applied to you when you fill out the application, or you allow a presumption to stand against you. In other words, the presumption stands against you when a cop comes in and says you were writes you into that court on a traffic ticket citation, and you don't rebut that. There's another application. You were silent on a fact before the court. No, I'm not saying I like all these deceptions. I'm saying that they're there to defeat. That Whitehead comes out, and again, this week, talks about your threat now is the deadly dangers of the traffic stops. You're now vulnerable, as Ron would say, in the hallway of your school. You're vulnerable to being shot to death. Just because you travel on that road that I can show you, they have no authority to do this to anybody on. But it's not through the motor vehicle code. It's through the grant of the land, the disposal of the land and soil to the use of the highway. That's another section of state law. The law that even the statutes have to recognize because they can't change that stuff. Why can't they change it? Because international law says they have to keep with the obligations of the prior government. That includes treaties. Disposals are treaty-esque or treaty-level agreements. But again, as John Whitehead will explain here, it's like playing Russian roulette. Most of the time you will emerge relatively unscathed, although decidedly poorer and less secure about your rights, but there's always the chance that the encounter will turn deadly. He goes on to describe a bunch of people that this has happened to. I ask you to read this so you understand this is how it happens to people. So you can identify, here's what I've figured out, and what seems to help, is you can identify the seeds of the direction going real bad, and you have to really quickly change the course by, a lot of times it's asking the right question. What's the right question? You start to assert the law that they're supposed to be subject to. So you have to know a bit of this. You know the basics. I went through this a little bit an example to show you how be careful you get yourself trapped. Do you have probable cause? Am I free to go? Well, that's a quick thing. They'll just tell you that you're not free to go, and they'll tell you have probable cause. You have to be able to go beyond that in your conversation. What you're doing, though, more importantly, is you're attempting to eliminate or at least reduce the possibility of being executed. For what? For anything they make up, as we find out. So I want you to read this. He goes on through a lot of stuff with lots of examples of how people get done in. A lot of it's on their own. I don't want to blame the people because this happened. This is not giving license to cost, but they cause things to happen and continue by not knowing enough. But you have to understand you're up against a criminal with a badge here. He's got license. That's otherwise illegal to do what they're doing without that license. And so you have to know how to attack that. That even so with the license didn't go that far. That becomes now their weakness. It's the color of authority. And one thing I've used a lot, it seems to make people laugh. And when this is retold to people, they laugh. But this is deadly serious. Understand, if you're witnessing a felony against you and they're armed, that's an aggravated felony. You're also the witness to that. Now they're tampering. These are all felonies on their part. It really was never supposed to get so violent. It was always supposed to be understood there was these lines that protected. There were these accepted norms that protected us because we were honoring them. But now we're dealing with literal criminals in the office. We now have to call it out. And what I focused on this for John's Whitehead's discussion, and he comes to the same point today as I told you. He's coming to very clearly. He was always, to me, half stating the points. I think it was really his attorney training. He's now coming on through it. And today he now says this ability for you to be executed on the mere opinion of a traffic violation of all things, rightfully or wrongfully asserted, is a condition of comply or die. Comply or die. That's where we are. And now I want to remind you, not because, I was so smart, but this is what the law was telling me. This is what international provisions were telling me way back in 95 or 96, and I felt bold enough to write about it in 99, and I said you were coming, as I've said last week and a few times before and a few years before this and various broadcasts, you're coming into the time of the corporate collective consequence, the current Middle Ages where you will have to comply or die. These many years later, Whitehead's come up with the same point. This is now obvious. And when you're in this time, you have to take these times serious, or else you are going to be the victim of them. There's no guarantees, but you can shift the burden and the liability psychologically to these mongrels, these executioners. You can hit them spiritually, and I don't mean biblically here, but there's a power behind that as well. In other words, no fear, folks. We're told don't fear. You don't give respect to persons, and no fear. That's not an arrogance. That's correct action. That's knowing your environment. It's what I ask you to consider every week. In all the ways I bring the news to try and explain it. As we're seeing this execution now, I mean, the cops are now executing more people than I think have been killed in any other country, in any other time, in this United States of America. And the only thing that it's not quite done yet is the government is coming after the journalists. The journalists are now threatened. They're now enemies just because of what they do, and that's got to send another signal and chill down your spine. That if you sit quiet, that's what you're subjecting yourself to. That it's not yet open execution in live camera in the United States, but it is in Brazil. So as this thing rolls down, as the tyranny rolls out, it gets worse and worse. Radio journalists critical of the government killed during live broadcast in Brazil. In Brazilistan, and so my thoughts immediately went to Solomon down there, who calls in the Freakers Ball periodically and regularly, to give us the insight from afar and from an internal, it was internal from afar though, and give us the backgrounds of a lot of this information that he calls from an anonymous phone booth. Apparently it's safer down there, even so, than it is in the United States of America. However, I've never talked to Solomon, so I don't know. I just hear his response periodically when I'm able to hear the podcast of Freakers Ball. Journalists are shot while they're doing a broadcast. Understand the psychological tension that's developed in a lot of this as well. It's probably coming to a journalist near you. A well-known radio journalist in Brazil was repeatedly denounced political corruption, was gunned down Thursday in the middle of one of his broadcasts. I won't say more. You can read on. You can get the story. You go put it in Google, find it yourself. This is what's coming on to us. This is what's happening. The government has figured out, and they probably knew this before, but now they figure they can get away with it, and they are. The crickets and the dogs, the helpless dogs that we is. They just shoot you now. They realize dead men and women tell no tales. And video phones may or may not be so valuable, except they can be a deterrent, and so I request that anybody that can have one ready. There's a video floating around right now where some Northern California cop pulls a gun on someone just hooking his boat to his truck. Made up a bunch of stuff. Guy was smart enough to get his camera out on his phone and start recording. It probably saved his life. You're looking for any deterrent, any distraction as well to go back against these executioners. We don't know who it was, or why would the guy die unless the people that killed him were government connected. There's no accountability as well. And we have to put that into our calculator of what the battlefield really is. I've said before, they're going to, as far as the people, and they've been doing it actually. United States of America, they're getting rid of the middle class. They're making it harder on people. It's very, very difficult for lots of people. I even see lying in the what do they call? What's going on now? The voting thing or the debates or something. I didn't read the debates, but there was conversation around all that. There was talk. I think they were talking about the middle class was going to support somebody. I said, there is no middle class. That's a lie to make people believe there's a middle class. That the war is coming to you in a way you're not going to be able to realize. And they slowly take away. It's incremental austerity, even though they haven't declared it here that we've been living under it. They've gotten rid of pretty much the middle class. They've gotten rid of the ability for the middle class to exist. And you're going down and starting to see the inflation happen. You're starting to see the shelves that are more empty. You're starting to, not in everywhere. I mean, again, this is all not absolutes. You see the Detroitification of America going through now as a cancer. You see all the division. You see the government is declared war, essentially. And people haven't picked up on that. What I have identified years and years now. Not because I see events in the news, it's because the law said it was coming. The so-called law. The plans that are written in law. And we get to see, as we were in Brazil, seeing what's happening to journalists now. Just open, we know that happens, but I mean, you see it. They called the United States of America, said journalists are now terrorists. So, well, here it comes, folks. Now we see in Brazil, they'll just shoot you on air. It doesn't matter. They get away with it, apparently. Right next door, Venezuela, increasingly looks like a war zone. This is how they're doing it. Over the years, we have repeatedly poked fun at the transformation of Venezuela into socialist utopia, an economy in a state of terminal collapse, where the destruction of the currency, now worth 107 times less than the official currency exchange rate, and the resulting hyperinflation is the only match by the barren wasteland that local stores have transformed into now that conventional supply chains are irreparably broken. And that just talk about Walmart eliminating for plumbing problems. They're not even selling food. They're getting their money from somewhere, but they're not selling food. I was just told by somebody that went to go get some produce. The produce wasn't there. I don't know why. Shouldn't have been no reason for it. I'm sure there's produce there today, but here it is, slowly pulling back certain things, and they get you into a state of war with your neighbor. And I told you this is going to be a very difficult thing to overcome, long-term, drawn-out austerity that you didn't know was on you. They grind you down. This is we see it. I told you, watch the Middle East. You're going to see how they're doing it to the United States. The United States is going to be blind walking. They're blind walking into what they think is people doing them good in the government, and they're helpless. I don't know of anybody that has anything that they know to do with respect to what I've learned you can do. I don't know of anybody that responds like I do. And I'm not taking that as a pat on the back. I'm saying we have been duped and helpless, trained into helplessness, learned into helplessness. That what I can find is right there for us to see is done by not many else, if nobody else. Is frightening at one level and sad on the other. Now, I think we deserve better. I think I deserve better for all the things I had never done in my life that I thought I was going to do. For all the greatness I thought was in me that hadn't happened. For all the wrong decisions I can make on my own behalf. That's not the point. They grind you down. This is a very interesting method that they use. And no one really sees it. And then they get us wrapped up in supporting it. I was telling you about the Tea Party way back when. I mean, that was a genuine uprising of people that immediately got confiscated, and who did it but Dick Armey. And I called that out behind Woodshed years and years and years ago. And you look how, in spite of the Tea Party, you see that, and despite the fact the Republicans are in power in the government, federal Congress, you see it. The toilet's flushing, folks. These are all tools to use to the outcome. They grind you down. They grind you into uselessness, and that's just another form of learned helplessness. And I don't know why I see all this destruction, but I don't think it's over. I know it's over if we remain if we maintain cricketdom, it's over. We want to be that dog. That it's over. But for some reason, I believe we are that close to the victory, if I could say it that way. But it's going to take each one of us making that decision. It's a really hard thing to do, overcome all this nonsense, crawl ourselves out of the part of the stinking abyss they threw us in, get out and look around, and then make the decision to be the one that's going to make that thing right that you saw wrong that you were exposed to. Getting beyond the fact of letting them grind you down and still becoming effective. This is a bigger deal. This is a bigger cause. Be careful on who comes to your aid as well, and watch out what might be happening. As we are turning this week, we go now back into the Middle East. Go back into there for a moment. The grinding down of Syria. You see the method. I told you that's a mirror over in the Middle East, what's happening in the United States. It's happening here now. People don't understand it. And finally, so how long the so-called legal system works to get anything done. It's all done. That's the delay tactic to gain advantage. See, gravity works immediately, and that's the way natural law works. When you're in delayed situation, you're in a controlled situation. In other words, when I see property rights that are not being recognized, in the first instance, I realize you have an occupying force. I don't have to have a big, drawn-out reasoning around it. You don't have direct property protection in a system that said it was required and had the obligation and duty to do so. You are now in occupied territory. I don't need anything else to tell me that. Now we have here the UN approves a resolution on investigation into gas attacks in Syria. Grinding this country down. This is important because I want to get to this. I wasn't going to talk too much, and then I saw a whole bunch of points pop up this week that I don't know how many people are talking about it because I don't really get out much to listen who's talking what. But if you didn't hear the war declared on Syria this last week or so, a week before that, you're not listening. The United Nations Security Council has voted in favor of a draft resolution of an investigation aimed at fighting the perpetrators of the chlorine gas attacks in the crisis-hit Syria. And what I found interesting in all of this was that the punishment for the perpetrators would be possible sanctions. First of all, nothing certain, but then sanctions. And immediately the thought was, that can't be upon the non-state rebels. The sanctions they're talking about in the context of the UN is a nation. And so here, finally, they're going to look at the Syrian thing where we found out proof already that the United States gave the chemicals to the rebels that they've now created and fabricated and trained to go after Assad. Their threat to attack them by cruise missiles failed. They then turned immediately to the second Plan B, if that was Plan B. It may have actually been Plan A, and the cruise missiles to go after Syria, a country that's never come against the United States. Understand what they're doing in your name here, folks, in the United States. The lies that we continue to allow, the lies that Congress allows. That we get to UN, another despicable organization, the formation of which was for despicable ends. The organization of which I referenced here, I think it was last week or week before, is used as a peace facade in order to take down countries, and I gave the example of the Congo, the Republic of Congo. They came in to make peace. Next thing you know, that nation was taken down, and they were the ones that was emulating the actual republic that the United States was supposed to be, taken down by the United States itself. If that doesn't cause a question in your mind, I don't know what to really say. That you need to start seeing this stuff to understand how diabolical things are. So they're going to now, they've all agreed they're going to go check into who did it, the perpetrators. But, is it really matter? So many other worse things have gone on. Look how much time is spent. And this organization does actually nothing. Everybody was pretty much up on this. I think everyone has their game to play. And I suppose that they all, the side on Syria that wants to show that Syria didn't do it, would like that fact to come out. And so they can point the perpetrators. The sanctions will go on the United States, which is a big joke. But the sanctions coming out and stopping the rebels in Syria that are actually the tool coming at Syria is doubtful, because sanctions are not on non-state entities. And so this is another type of facade. But as the week was going through, I realized something's. It really doesn't matter. This is all coming in time. It's all coming in time to make it look like certain things are going on when they're not actually not. That there's been war declared on Syria now. Turkey says it struck a deal with the United States on air support for Syria rebels. What does it matter? They're going to talk about the gas attack now. They're now moving. Turkey's going to allow U.S. air support right there for Syria rebels. They're talking in words that they're going to go after is, but there's no stopping them from attacking Assad himself. And Syria hasn't done a damn thing to the United States of America. So there's another plan afoot. Did you hear the war declared against Syria? No. But here it is. It's the elements. U.S. acting as air support to Al-Qaeda in Syria against is. Al-Qaeda, we've identified the players. These are really all manufactured by the United States. This is another method. It's kind of like the onion situation. Which layer are you going to be focused on? Without going to the core, you're always going to be focused on a layer, and it's not going to matter. Wasn't this whole 9/11 thing the lie to go stop Al-Qaeda, Al-CIA? Duh. Yeah, it's a United States government operation, continuously. U.S. coalition aircraft struck is positions in support of Syrian rebels, including Jabhat al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda's official Syria affiliate, along with another prominent jihadist group. And that's what they're telling you, but they're really killing a lot of civilians. Now, I didn't get up the news, but you may have heard or may not have heard that just a few weeks ago, and I wondered why they did this. Everyone was saying, he's retreating because he's losing. Assad pulled all his forces that were out and dropped them back to more defensible positions weeks ago. before this announcement. I have a suspicion their intelligence was telling them this was coming, and so they're re-engaging against the United States, not the rebels. So the silent war was declared, and I didn't hear much of a peep over all this, saying that's exactly what's going on. The United States is going to attack, utilizing all the tools at its disposal, or the ones it can conjure up, to attack Syria. Obama authorizes airstrikes to defend Syria rebels, even from Assad. It finally came out days later, even from Assad. Now, I don't know how anybody can look at this and not say this is war on Syria. Just reading headlines, folks, is just how you tie it together. You could read the story. I read some of the story. I want to hear some of the nuances of what's going on to find out the method. Syria says air support to rebels would be aggression. You think. See, they're telling you. The government of Syria pulled back to more defensive positions, not because it was against the rebels. It was because they probably got wind that the war had been declared. It was being geared up. Turkey was going to allow the United States fighters, jets, to come in to go bomb it. Obama authorizes U.S. strikes on U.S.-trained rebels. Another story here, folks. U.S.-trained rebels. It's now coming out. All the speculation's gone here. And then I found this story completely, well, at first it was serious because it's people dying. But other than that, I said, wow, this is kind of interesting how they're pulling this off. They bring up the fact that there's U.S.-trained rebels in there fighting in Syria, and then they also bring up the idea that the Pentagon had spent $500 million to train rebel forces. We heard all that news, and yet when it went into battle, it lost its first battle. Bad, they tell us. On July 31st, the rebels known as Division 30 were attacked by al-Nusra Front, an al-Qaeda affiliate Syria. They performed poorly in the firefight and had to withdraw from their base near the town of Azaz. Clashes between members of al-Qaeda, al-Qaeda, al-Nusra Front, a branch in Syria, and a rebel faction in the country's north believed to have been trained by the United States government have stopped after the rebels left their headquarters. Remember now, Jordan was the training spot. What they promoted here at first was, wow, the Pentagon trained a bunch of people and they lost. Maybe that was the diversion, folks. Maybe they were set up and trained to lose as well. They were fodder in this war that's been going on since they declared they were going to hit them with a cruise missile. All this time. In fact, the $500 million Syrian rebel forces that were trained probably didn't spend $500 million on those. They were trained just enough to get them in a position to make this report that the fighters trained by the United States lost. I don't think so, folks. They might have made it look like they lost. They actually got to escape, so they didn't all just walk into some ambush. But then we hear another story that really kind of touches this off. If you haven't heard that we're in a war with Syria, a literal war right now. They're just not using U.S. troops, at least obviously until we find out maybe it's the British troops. British SAS Special Forces. Remember, we talked about this behind the woodshed. I pointed out some things in the news. In the prior invasions of other countries, SAS forces were used to come in, infiltrate target places, before they actually did invasions. The British SAS Special Forces have been reported to be dressed up as IS rebels fighting Assad in Syria. It's been on, folks. But they're dressed as is. I thought this was against any idea of the Geneva Convention, which totally is out the window now. It's whatever it takes. And it's whatever it takes for you and your psychology to keep you not responding. I want you to think about this condition where they got British forces looking like is rebels, I'm going to make a connection here as we look at the reflection in the United States right now. But SAS Special Forces. On August 2nd, Britain's Sunday Express newspaper headlined SAS dress as ISIS fighters to uncover a war on jihadis, saying more than 120 members belonging to the elite regiment are currently in the war-torn country, covertly, quote, dressed in black and flying ISIS flags. Engaged with what's called Operation Shader, attacking Syrian targets on the pretext of combating ISIS. Folks, it's on. But look at what the military has done to they look like the enemy. They've put on the uniform of a foreign foe. Maybe they are the foreign foe, and they are the terrorists then. But facade nonetheless. In something that's never been talked about. We're just starting to hear about this condition. Now, I want to jump this over the pond. You have SS in Syria. They're now making a way for the attack on Syria by saying that they're going to attack the very elements that they've created to do the softening up of the target. That I want to jump this British SAS over into the United States, and let's go just again to remind you, just summarily here. I don't get into that too much. Is Jade Helm? What did they say Jade Helm was about? But to sneak people into our towns and cities to see if they could get away with it and run a military operation. How much have you heard about that actually going on? I hear lots of things going, oh, the military's moving on the trains and this. I told you that happens every summer. Forget that one. That wasn't what the exercise is about. It was getting people getting military to look like the natives, sneak them in and see if they could get things done. Has anybody correlated the timing between Jade Helm going live, so-called? I told you it was probably gone on for months and months and months, as we were being told that military people were seen going around the town, and then some were seen in groups of 4 that were dressed like the civilians, going in and talking to people. That was months and months ago. I said that's the operation, folks. They're doing you good. Here's the example right here of British forces in ISIS. That Jade Helm is you got some normal guy with a baseball cap. It's actually military doing surveillance and reconnaissance on you, and or doing whatever they plan on doing to see if they can get away with it. Has anybody made the correlation between? And I told you this about Obama bringing back Lincoln, the regurgitation of Lincoln and Roosevelt. That 2 days after that we were told that Jade Helm went live, the Confederate flag fell. And the psyop that went around that to dispose of that and put it in favor of a different type of new normal, the rainbow flag now covers this. Anybody kind of look at that? And I told you the week following I made the comment about the Confederate flag, the South should rise again. And I asked you, have I said that? Well, I didn't. But I said it then. I'm saying it now. You're looking at the property right. You're looking at your country's infiltrated. Whether or not it becomes this military diversion or a military fact, you're watching the overthrow of your nation. The attack is on. They're doing it in the United States, and they have been doing it. This is just one of the pieces that have been going on for a couple decades now, as I've been seeing it, as I could predict in 95, or find in 95, and then became bold enough to write about it. And I was only bold because I didn't want to make a mistake that maybe, I didn't know so much, because I was still learning quite a bit. That you're watching the infiltration of your nation. And the example in the Middle East reflecting to us is these British forces dressing up as is. And be careful on what we go too far. That's a tool, but remember, is. It kind of occurred to me, I guess we go is, real. Is Israel. That's one possibility. Is actually is Israel. Another possibility is is ISIS. Absolutely. And don't underestimate this Pope thing coming up in September, the new world government coming that you may not have quite picked up on, this climate change thesis, this idea of nature, this nature worship. You think that Catholicism is anything but. You need to go look back and see. ISIS is part of this, is part of this on a religious side. There's never been a non-religious time when there hasn't been a religious war, it seems. That the correlations of these are just too great. The techniques and tactics they're using are too great. That you're looking at a global overthrow right in your face and I hear crickets is astonishing to me. Isis, Horus, go back, you see all the symbology. Go look between the consistencies of the symbols between the Catholic Church. Be cautious here. I'm not talking Christian, and I'm not talking Catholic as Christian. It's a difference. Break that. They're not the same. Catholicism and Islam. Go look at the connections in the symbology. Islam followed Catholicism. Go consider that Islam is today's ISIS, back when 1,000 years, to destroy another belief system that simply said, man's not the power. Why are all these things coming together, all have very direct correlations to this? Why do we not understand this layers of the onion? Why don't we understand these connections? You know the Jesuits are going to be back there. Why are they all coming up now in September? This climate change nonsense is going to come up as a new government. Why, as you see, as I told you, it's a universal religion that's coming. How are they going to do it? They're going to bring it into the ancient pagan ritualization, which is what the Catholicism comes from. Can you see the correlations here? They're taking down nations over this. They're going to install a complete umbrella condition. And I hear crickets on all these different points. What I'm attempting to do is the little guppy that I am, I'm trying to swim to the surface to kind of get a better idea on what is their weakness. You got to find their weakness. It's there. I mean, I've got some ideas. A lot of it's your consent. A lot of it's you getting aware enough to say the right thing to them. And it doesn't take much. Again, if you go to the biblical side, you realize that the Catholic Church exalts Mary, speaks to the mother of Mary, exalts Mary, and destroys the Christ. And you're going to see that very highly consistent with what happens in Islam. They have to. Islam followed Catholicism, not Christianity. The why is the pagan and the sun issue, all these symbologies is Isis and Horus. Why is all this in the Catholicism also shown in the symbology of Islam? And we have ISIS. Is Israel? Who knows? Why are these all consistent in that place, in that land? Why are those techniques being used completely consistent in the United States of America? This is, and if you can see that, how big is it? How organized is this thing that's transparent to us? We're talking now, when we get into the pagan religions and we get the symbology and how that all ties together with Catholicism, we're getting into Lucifer, Satan worship. Isis and Horus, Satan. Why is everything repeating itself and we don't see that? If it's happened repeatedly, wouldn't we just... Law of nature should say, our normal awareness should say, hey, wait a minute, we've seen that a couple times. How about if we don't let that happen now? Maybe we might interrupt something. What if I'm wrong? What if we just interrupted it, folks? Maybe I'm wrong, but let's interrupt it. They say the battlefield's now cyber wars, but in fact they're killing people on the ground. So I'm not quite sure about this. But cyber again is war. The Internet of Things, the war field that they're causing with all this nonsense, and how we're even getting the information, how my voice is spoken to you. is the Internet of Things we were told by Rumsfeld. These people are telling you stuff. I brought out the Silent Weapons, Quiet Wars data, and I told you, no, it was big data. And it wasn't necessarily NSA as much to worry about necessarily as it was commercialism in their control. And we brought out all these kinds of things that you're going to be monitored. You know, we don't know what this Jade Helm is really doing. We don't know what their end result is. I'm thinking that they declared war on the United States silently, just like they did with the British SAS in Syria. We're is. They're not. The military here in Jade Helm, we're the local guy in a baseball cap and loves stock car racing, and they're not. They're going to change things here. Whether or not it requires FEMA camps is irrelevant, and I don't think I told you, I don't think that they're going that obvious. They're not going to rile the natives. It's just the fact. Not even the United States is riling the natives in Syria. They're making plausible deniability everywhere, and someone else is doing it. That's just the UN method as well. Influence someone to put the gun to their head and pull the trigger. Notwithstanding, we have a pistol in the plaza with a knot in the barrel. We're going to hand you the gun, and you pull the trigger. We told you shouldn't have guns. And so this is our consent again, our will being used against us. The choice we make is prevalent in the destruction. And the choices we omit to make is the other destruction, which is why the crickets become so important here. It's that silent power. The power that's defeating us. That dog that is learned this helplessness. Folks, it's only learned helplessness. You can unlearn it. I guess that's part of what makes me feel something can happen. I've unlearned certain things. I don't know all that I've unlearned. I've unlearned certain things. I carry all kinds of sticks in my back pocket to stick in people's spokes that are criminals. In the machine, the system, the gears of the machine. I got logs now. I grew my little sticks up into bigger trees. You can too, and you can be aided by what directions I found these things, and you can take those to make them yours. And understand me when I tell you, very clearly understand me when I tell you, what I tell you is not enough. You're learning about it's not enough. You will have to learn how to engage it. How many people I come across in a day that I've told information to that understand it, and then I ask them, well, now, okay, how are you going to take this, and how are you going to apply this? And the answer, probably 9 times out of 10, is not the correct answer. Once I explain how the information's used, then the answers come right. So there's a learning process beyond the knowledge. They have us behind this. They've put stuff in given us benefit of things. And now this war that they have rolled out, the Silent Weapons, Quiet Wars, the Quiet Wars. But British SAS as is. Advancing. Look at is British. British is the church. The church is owned by the Vatican. Just tie that one up. How do you know that? Well, because it was an agreement that happened. There's an agreement, folks. It's a contract. At minimum, it's a contract. So these devices were given to us. They were laid out. Big data. They need to monitor. They did the UN thing. It's not really attributed to the UN, but this is what we can focus on. They monitor, they evaluate, and then they adapt. And that's what this infrastructure thing about the Internet's about. Well, GE's just added some more infrastructure in a platform. They have something called the Predix Internet of Things platform, PREDIX. It's an industrial database of answers that you plug in your sensors. Remember the folks, the sensors that they're going to put on your clothes, and you won't even know they're there. They're going to be in the fabric. IBM has a program already to accept the data of that and make decisions on it. GM announced today that it was expanding its Predix Internet of Things platform to provide infrastructure as a service. The IaaS market is dominated by Amazon Web Services, with many others, including Microsoft, Google, and IBM, vying for a piece of the action. So your Amazon Web Service is part of big data. It's part of this system. Gee, how many of you use it? I know I see lots of people. In fact, Oracle Broadcasting had one of its services as part of its content providing part. They offer the benefit. You move right into it. There it is. They can now take the data and use it to whatever they want, not you. GE hopes to differentiate itself from these companies by offering infrastructure services specifically tuned to the needs of industrial customers. What I'm saying about your worst problem will be not NSA, although that's really bad. It'll be your commercial. Here's the news. Here's the notice to you. It's happening. They are making platforms to make decisions on sensor data that they get from companies that have put it in. Look at your iPhone. Look at all this stuff. The clothes, where you are, how you're doing it. They are making the ability to do this. In fact, it's already here. They're focusing right now. They tell us the stories like on their GE's jet engines and all these generators and all this other stuff. But it's way beyond. Way beyond. If you think that you're going to be some body of militia, military people that's protecting your country, and you haven't seen that Jade Hell may be the reflection of what the British SAS did to overthrow Syria, and that's not moving to overthrow the United States, despite whatever justification or oath they took. I don't know who's running this thing. All I know is I can see the reflection. Is it going to happen? I don't know. I don't know that it is. I don't know that it's not. I can see the reflection. That if you think that you're going to be able to outmaneuver these people with your ignorance on the technology they already have, I'm asking you to rethink yourself. Rethink your whole condition. This is a different war field. The Internet of Things was not a joke. And most of which is probably already in place. Now they're just fine-tuning it. It says retune, folks. It says retune. Transform, retune. They're adapting now to all the infrastructure they already have that keeps track on about everything that utilizes electronic devices. The trespass of which all these devices can be trespassed now. We're finding out easier and easier. There's another story this week. A new virus created that can completely wreck Apple computers. This piggybacks on top of another story they kind of threw out there that your firmware and your hard drives could be pre-programmed by China to steal all your stuff and take control of your machine. But guess what? It wasn't just China. 2 security consultants have created a new computer worm, the Thunderstrike 2, that attacks the core hardware of a Mac computer once unleashed. You think they can't do it to Windows? Mac moved into using Windows, or not, when AMD, Intel, processor architecture. So I suspect this has already been going on with all the rest of you. You don't need Windows 10 anyway. But here it is for Mac. All you all think you got a protection. I think Apple was looking out for you. We had plenty of that nonsense to see. The worm was designed to expose vulnerabilities in the once assumed airtight security of Apple products. The worm works by attacking the computer's firmware. Firmware. This is the stuff they program into the chips that run your hardware. Your software rides over the top of that, has nothing to do with it. It's the stuff, it's kind of like the thing when you turn on your computer, it's the program that's programmed into the chip that explains how your computer is going to start to accept the software. It teaches the machine how it tells the machine how it responds to inputs, more sensors. These security consultants, so-called, figured out a way to attack that firmware, the software that comes pre-installed and loads with operating system. Firmware provides control, monitoring, and data manipulation in engineering products or systems. Enough said. You are in a digital environment, not of your making, and I have to assume the NSA has known about this all along. Forget all this other nonsense. You're sitting in a battlefield that's dominant. They say human dominance is what Jade Helm was. They're dominating you by obfuscation. They're dominating you in systems that you have no idea that's available to you, and you think you're going to defend yourself from it. This whole affront is transparent to you. How are you going to, except for the breeze that you think is blowing your hair by they're moving past you so fast, except for that little sense that you thought a breeze just went by you, how are you going to respond? Has anybody thought about it, first of all? Secondly, has anybody in any unified way thought about it, that if somebody unified that does know about this comes against you, that you're going to be able to defend yourself? When you find out that the algorithms of your life are all been designed against you, and you don't even know what's an algorithm. What the hell? Oh, that's what they did with algebra. That's why I should have known more about it. But the data that they give us is no good. The data they know about is good. But that's transparent to you. We got British SAS soldiers now looking like is. You think maybe that was the SAS soldiers also that got attacked and then ran away and said they got defeated to give the impression that the United States is weak? You think Syria, you think Assad and their people is taking that bait? The groupers that we are? No, they moved, weeks ago, they moved back. They pulled back most of their defenses to get in a more defensible position. Why? I didn't know at the time. I can sure see it now. So they get this data, this intelligence, and they work with it. They take action based on it. And we sit here oblivious to it all. War is declared on Syria, and I don't even hear a peep. Didn't hear a little chick, let alone a cricket. It's like an ongoing test. I mean, I don't, and we fail it. It seems to me we're failing it at every test. Which gets me on to these things that we're told that are supposed to be telling us information. The information, garbage in, garbage out. If we would understand that that's what it was, but we're told it's the bee's knees. It's what you have to know. Oh yeah, the United States got beat up over there on their. They put all this $500 million into 60 people, and they got beat down their first. Yeah, sure, right. Right. Same way back over here. We get information. We put all this money in, and this is what we come out with, and this is what's good for you. Just cause we say. Just because there's a war against you that hasn't been declared, just like all this other stuff, it comes silent under the facade and costume and charade. The charades of which are information that we thought we were using information for to better make decisions in our lives, which is natural and normal, but that little thing was taken advantage of. That over time you kind of see that there's something not quite right. And you start questioning, and then you're called a heretic when you question reality by those that are trying to keep you dumbed down and helpless, feeling helpless, because they're the ones they're the authorita. And then here is a report. Likelihood of null effects of large NHLBI clinical studies has increased over time. Background, it's an abstract. We explore whether the number of null results in large national heart, lung, and blood institute funded trials has increased over time. In the war of health against you, in the license the government has given pharmaceuticals to war against you, you animal, you little dog. We identified all large NHLBI supported RCTs between 1970 and 2012, evaluating drugs or dietary supplements for the treatment or prevention of cardiovascular disease. Trials were included in direct costs less than $500,000 a year. Participants were adult humans, the little monsters, animal monsters, those without inheritable blood. For the definition, go to Ballantyne's Dictionary, 1930. And the primary outcome No inheritable blood means you don't have property, folks. You probably are property. You're an animal. You're a beast of burden. You're sitting in a cage somewhere. You're in some turnstile. You're doing where you're told to go, why you're told to go. And if you say otherwise, they beat you down a bit till you start getting in shape again. Because you didn't just get up out of that stall and say, wait a minute. That's not where I'm supposed to be. But we're adult humans, and the primary outcome was cardiovascular risk, disease, or death. The 55 trials meeting these criteria were coded for whether they were published prior to or after the year 2000, whether they registered in the clinicaltrials.gov prior to publication, used active or placebo comparator, and whether or not the trial has industrial co-sponsorship. We tabulated whether the study reported a positive, negative, or null result on the primary outcome variable and for total mortality. Conclusion. I'll just jump through because the numbers don't translate well on the air or even on TV. The number of these NHLBI trials reported positive results declined after the year 2000. Prospective declaration of outcomes in RCTs and adoption of transparent reporting standards as required by clinicaltrials.com may have contributed to the trend toward null findings. What does this all mean? It means that when they were put under scrutiny after 2010 and given the choice, those that did participate to try and throw some objectivity to what they were doing, when they went to, they stopped saying that the trials had positive effect for the pharmaceuticals. They didn't want to say negative, so they just said, oh, there was null effect. Where they gave the opportunity to look into the trial after 2000, the data they start telling you was that these pharmaceuticals had no effect on what they were doing in the mortality. In other words, the rest did not want to give you the information by putting it in the trial. Severely discrediting everything happening before 2000. My observation was that the trials are a placebo themselves. So it's important to have a standard that's repeatable. This is what science used to be: repeatable observations and repeatable outcomes on standardized type conditions, or as set up by the one who originated the plan. That we see that this data goes through models, that it goes through some sort of scrutiny, and when you expand the scrutiny to be a lot, well, they don't tell a lie, I guess. They were not so bold to then say that the medication, the pharmaceutical, the dietary supplement they were making had a positive outcome on it. They didn't want to even go negative, that it actually helped the mortality rate. They decided they're just going to say null. Remember about placebos. They can be a false placebo. We found that fraud out as well. Nonetheless, I figure that this response, this retrial, this review makes clinical trials a placebo themselves. In other words, I mean, you can even put your own intimation on all this. They're null, folks. I mean, it's supposed to be inert. Clinical trials, all this money spent on clinical trials is for null. In other words, what the pharmaceutical system is doing is nothing, essentially, within a small percentage, certainly. So when placed against a proper model, a proper situation, a proper test, the truth starts to come out, which is what science was supposed. Even if in its craziness, where you ask one question and you get an answer, you're actually going to get 10 more questions. Even within that kind of neat thing, you have some certainty that you can build in when you have a validation of the process, which comes up next now. This other thing, as we come up with this new thing coming on with the war against us, this Catholic, actually nature's religion, this ancient pagan imposition now on the world that people, well, that should have went away a long time. It was ancient, right? Well, no, it never really has gone away. This earth worship is still here in spades. That it's going to be important for everyone to have knowledge in their head when they decide to make that choice. Do you want to have free will, or do you want someone to tell you what to do? Do you want to be that puppy that feels he's learned he's helpless, or do you want to learn that you're not in that cage? And those that tried to put you there are criminals. That you need to have a better idea of how you address these people that are bringing you nothing but fantasy and authority. You've got to bring reality and more law, if I can call that. I know it sounds kind of funky anymore, but there is basic, even natural law. Gravity works. The sun does exist. That models that you're told information is run through have to be validated. And these computer models probably can never be validated. That they give you that the government comes off and gives you information from, which is I've been totally, I've been against that forever. In every sense. I mean, it's just like it's the stupid. I call them animations. Someone makes this stuff up, like the Fukushima that came racing across from Fukushima, Japan, all the way across the Pacific Ocean, and this big blob hits the West Coast. It was an animation. They made it up. Someone just made it up. That was a model. Never validated, never proved out, never reviewed, just brought out, put it in the public, and everyone sucked it up. That this validation principle is going to have to come valid to you and important. You've got to validate everything. It comes up now. Validation of a climate model is mandatory. The invaluable work of Dr. Vincent Gray, as written as a guest opinion by Dr. Tim Ball. And these people have a very good way to explain, much better than I do, on how you approach the problem with the fraud of climate change. Something that's going to come up here in September with this Catholic Pope going to stand on this fraud and going to tell you how to live your life. And the world's going to support it. You're going to have to, well, you don't have to. You're going to make a decision whether you have to or not. It's up to you, but you're going to make the decision. You're either going to learn enough and confront it properly and take your lumps, or learn how to learn enough to make it so they can't put the lumps on you. Validation is a big deal here for the climate models. None of them can. I don't know of any computer model that can suffice to model the Earth, especially when, by definition, climate change denies the input by the sun, because it denies the existence of the sun, because it focuses on man-caused harm, which is an infinitesimal thing compared to the structure of it, and I don't even understand how you can see that. In other words, when I was in electronics and did that, when you're doing the R&D, you got to be careful. Measurement's a real serious matter. You really have to pay attention to what you measure, how you measure, what you use to measure. You really have to understand things, and it was really an eye-opener when we started to get into really finding out really what was going on. That's where I started to understand the limit of what we understand, and how we approach things is a limit. That when there is a condition in a system that contributes something so small, and generically it's up to 10% of another type of influence, you may not be able to model, see, measure, or actually decide what that 10% influence has on the rest of it, because it's such a small piece. Let me put it down, that's 1%. Something 1%, you can't know how it's going to interfere. You can't know, certainly with cycles and frequencies, you can't know when that thing's going to become a major player in its time. That all this data they're using, all this sensors, all this stuff GE puts together to make decisions on your life is the reality. That climate change is going to become the impetus of more costs on you, and the minimum carbon taxation. They're going to get a religion behind this thing going. It'll be universal. Everybody now will have to put Earth first. That's what this encyclical said, remember? Humans don't have a place. Humans are the problem. But these models cannot be validated because they don't incorporate the entire system, and yet they are used against you. So beyond enough there. You can read these articles. They're in the Blogcaster. You'll see somebody who's trained in doing this to explain to you better than I will what I've actually said over time in my own way are the ways that you argue this thing. It's not an argument. The standard has not been met. It's not an argument. You either meet the standard as a scientist or you're not a scientist. It's pretty much that simple. As I tell people about the mining law, the property law, you don't walk in with a question. You give them the answer, and then they say, well, why isn't the law the answer? You shift the burden to these people. You don't assume that what they're doing is correct. A bunch of supercomputers running the wrong model will just get you the wrong answer faster. It doesn't give you a better model. It doesn't give you a better result. Why don't we understand this? We have no mind of time of what we do. We're absent the processes of life, of nature and man-made as well. That I've told you over and over again. When you start factoring in on this fraud, you start factoring in all the things that they claim we're supposed to go to as the result of this fraud. In other words, they want to talk about green energy. It's all a fraud. It all comes from the sun, folks. I mean, I don't know what to tell you, unless it's atomic. And then that came from something. I don't know, maybe the sun. Maybe there's some degradation going on from neutrons. I don't know. That might be one. But they claim that the wind power is better and the solar power is better. And I told you, being in R&D electronics, if you have never seen a silicone wafer made, a silicone chip made, you don't understand. You don't understand that even the silicone chips that they make, in fact, the system would have to be so big, made out of silicone, just to make the silicone itself, that it's not cost effective. You certainly are eating up in doing the process of making a solar cell. You're using up more power and creating more chemicals, nasty chemicals actually, to make these cells than you could ever consider being so-called green, and the green religion and supporting climate change. That the amount of electricity to make the silicone wafer itself, not with any other processing. These are in big, hot electrical furnaces, absolutely controlled environments. Now I understand they got discs of silicone crystal 10 inches in diameter. Think of a piece of glass 10 inches in diameter, folks. Made out of silicone. It's just like sand, but it's special. Very special. Well, the analysis shows solar modules cause more greenhouse gas emissions than the modern coal-powered plants. When you get the whole system into play, regardless of what the invalidatable models, or even if they might be looked at as valid, when you get all the numbers worked out, the answer that they're driving you to, the one that they're giving credit for, cannot accomplish the task. Which got to point out that you're in complete insanity land. And it's what I said before about the fact that making solar cells couldn't really be green, but I think it's I like the technology. It gives you independent power, which is super important. Super important, the power. Independent power, that's what it does. It transfers the type of power you have, but it's not because it's cleaner. That's really the secret about the solar panels. You get enough of those things and you can live without being connected to the system. One more leash being cut loose. Why they're so much against you living off the grid. And no one's hit that thing particularly well. But understanding a complete system is the key. You can't just you can't put blinders on like in the climate change and say, well, man caused this, an infinitesimal contribution to the whole thing, whole matter. And then when we find out what he does, when we do that, it's no different than any other thing we do. It's all energy, folks. It's all we're talking about here. It's transferring one thing into something else. That's all we're doing. And it takes energy to do that. And the efficiency with which you do that gives you some margin of variability on the costs. And the better we learn, the better we do, the more efficient we can become. But it costs energy. It costs to ship the stuff around. It costs to put someone to put it on your place. It costs to store it. It costs for the lighting. It costs for all the chemicals. It costs to make the chemicals. It all comes from somewhere. The energy has to come from somewhere. And for the most part, to make silicone cells, you have to go to coal-fired plants to do it. Because that's how it has the power. That's the power density is there. And I say, if any of you have a better idea, make it, folks. I mean, although be careful, you're going to be shut down because there's other influences in the world. They need this excuse. It's like when you come up with an answer for pollution and to control pollution, the government will not listen to you. In fact, you'll be vilified. And I know I have a couple of friends that are right in that. They were astonished until I explained the condition to them. Why would the government not want to clean up the environment when it says that there's an environment to clean up? Well, because there's lots of control and money involved in this. Lots of places to divert lies and fraud. That's why. The bottom line, it's pretty simple. The bottom line to control you. And no one ever stops and says, whoa, let's hold the horses here. Since that's the only thing they're going to leave you to, that of the bicycle. But knowing the entirety of the problem gives us may have different answers. And then when you focus the blinder, that should be a problem to us to begin with. I don't have to know about the fraud of climate change to say, wait a minute, if you're blindering my model is blindered to one causation, yet there's this whole other world. And this causation is only 1 to 10% of the input on something that's so much greater than what that one little input is. And that's what your whole focus is on. Maybe I'm going to come up with the wrong answer. Maybe I'm going to find something else is going on. Maybe I'm going to be able to solve a problem so much more efficiently and quickly, and maybe easier if I was told the more total truth. It might be that there's anthropomorphic contribution to cause an environment that may contain a heat temperature. It doesn't matter. There's a 1,000-time bigger system that gets rid of that every night, but maybe there's that little contribution. Maybe it exists, but in the truth of it, does it really matter? Well, this is what we have to start learning. Validating reality, not just validating the model, which can never. Fluid dynamics model, I mean, I can't say never. You know, we don't know about never, but, oh boy, I just still can't see it right now. Not how stupid we are. Not how politically corrupt we are either. I mean, we'd rather push an agenda. We're silent to that as well. But let's move on in. What about a complete model for your health? We keep talking about all this, the climate change. You're hurting Mother Nature on an infinitesimal contribution, all these bad chemicals, all this stuff they tell you that's supposed to go on. And what about our health that's coming from all this? No one seems to really look at the models of that or whether those are proper. Nobody looks at all the facts. They only look at the facts that will move the agenda. Tuberculosis, for instance. Tuberculosis cover-up. Over 80% of the Western cases are among immigrants. Why is this important? Because when you do the study, you find out that all the cases that are immigrants, their diets are deficient. Their mineralization is deficient. And so all this hype they put on supposed tuberculosis things and outbreaks and whatever else they want to do is fabricated in an untruth. That they're not telling you that the blinders they put on was the natural blinders of the people that are being affected, their reality. Again, taking all the facts, validating all the facts in an environment about a subject matter is going to be a key for you, and you're going to have to know how to do this very much quicker. And that's where the computers help as well. We can pull stuff together a lot quicker. The problem with the internet is it's so flooded with bad information, it's kind of mind-boiling a bit to try and keep up. But we hear about these illnesses, and we hear that this stuff's going on, and we don't realize it. Really, it's from places and about things that we aren't causing at all. Again, the model is limited. It's not set up correctly. We have to know about that. We have to know to call that out. And we see in studies, the studies are there if we just look at the treatment of pulmonary tuberculosis on the lines of mineral deficiency. In fact, that's exactly, darn it, the name just slipped from my mind. That's exactly what the dentist, that dentist of I think in the 30s found out. People that lived in cultures that had a sufficient diet had beautiful teeth. And those that moved to diets that were deficient in minerals had not as good teeth, and they had tuberculosis. It didn't need a special chemical, a special pharmaceutical, didn't need a vaccine, just need to eat better. The text is available, I'll have it in in the blogcaster. You can read these studies for yourself. The model that authority comes with is defective. The purpose it comes is defective. It's a fraud and crime. If you learn how that is, you can bring that up and you can take the responsibility you were supposed to take and start to help to shut it down. Now, in the days when your NDAA is extrajudicial, there is no law, there's no judiciary, and the judiciary anyway is corrupt because it's the occupier, it's the supporter of, remember what I say about the Bar Association, be a member of the International Bar Association, being the advisor of the Holy See in the UN. We're back to that is connection for the world and the control. That you have to point out, you understand that battle for that selection of authority in your way. You have to learn to defeat every bit of it as you move, but you got to do it in a sheet, one sheet of paper kind of summary. That's on point statements that are irrefutable. They're never a question, never a place to argue. And when they try to argue, they're stepping very much on the line of felony because they're taking a false authority to try and change what you're saying was the fact and the reality. That people are being beat down because of the ignorance of this capacity to do this. And for sure, it's one of those methods that distances you a bit from the execution of whatever they were doing. It really does back that off. That this idea that why you don't see despite the fact that it makes more greenhouse gases, that's a fraud, so I don't worry about that part. The fact that these solar cells will make you independent and get you so-called off that grid, get you out of the matrix, it gives you into contention, shows you that this next story shows you that you will have the fight, that they want everybody to be commingled together, that you're going to have to understand a bigger thing. Why I go to property law, and you have a formidable law that the statutory code cannot beat. You'll find that all statutory code is subservient to the Constitution. Why they changed the Constitution over time, why you have to be careful about what goes into the Constitution, but still property is recognized. That if this party had understand this may not have turned out this way. Court rules living off the grid is illegal. See, so while they talk to you that they need green energy, they don't want you to have it. They'd rather do things like Solyndra, get you to pay for it another way. Why would this system promote green solar cells, independent power, and then not allow it to you? If there was a truth about this green power, it's all a lie. In this case, would indicate that to me. It's been a little bit old. I want to just point that out now. It's been older. I would on my tabs, but it's still as relevant today as I'm talking about it. It seems to come right in. For many, it's long-lived dream to get off the grid, the life to live self-sufficiently. But unplugging from municipal services has been ruled illegal by a court in Cape Coral, Florida. Special Magistrate Eskin ruled that Robin Speronis is not allowed to live on her own private property without being hooked up to the city's water system. He admitted that she had the right to live without utility power, but said that her alternative power sources must always be approved by the city. So, the property, is it owned by the city? Has she made a statement somewhere that makes the judge believe the evidence is such that it's subject to city code? And they, in fact, put a code. This is an international uniform code, folks. This is international law, soft law being placed locally to a property owner. And it says that the city's argument is that the International Property Maintenance Code was, quote, violated by her reliance on rainwater rather than paying the city for water. The IPMC also would make it a crime for her to use solar panels instead of being tied into electrical grid. Why, if this all comes from the international UN, why would it be illegal if the green religion needed you to go to green so-called green solar panels? The incongruity here is stark. The imposition of a foreign law on your local property rights is stark, and what's even starker than that is the ignorance of the property owner not to call all these usurpers out between the judge and the city and the International Property Management Maintenance Code itself, and the usurpation of the state and the government and the city to take her property rights, contrary to the state constitution, needed to be asserted here. All these people coming as a color of authority to take her right to live unconnected, as the judge did identify. But I will suspect that the record showed that she had a deed to the property, and essentially she's a tenant. She didn't show she had a patent right that stopped that, and then declared the title to be on the record, and declared the answer would be on who had the highest title. So you have the right, but you can't exercise it. Only says that you don't. You are a subject. And we are ignorant of how to make that change or to establish the distinction so that we're not, again, folks, I don't know if you know this, all these statutes are done for your benefit. They do this to take care of you because you're the animals. And you haven't learned to throw that off, even the presumption of it. That in just looking at energy totally and seeing it's all around us, and what science doesn't know, what science doesn't model, and the incongruities between the demand on one side to go green and big carbon footprint small, and yet the other side you have to give permission to go do that. Remember, they're also working on the city's working on market value. That's not their property. And that's not what you're doing with your own property. So no one knows how to stop that either. This is all market value. If you didn't pay for the property as a sale and you took it as a grant, it wouldn't even be in the rolls that way, would it? But see, people don't understand the power of a patent and how you convey one. They think it's by deed of sale and deed and purchase. No, it's by grant. You won't see any documentation inside the codes over this kind of thing, over the grant. So going back, we have power all around us. We don't have models for some of this stuff. It's fascinating how much energy is around us that we haven't tapped into yet. And I don't know this, we hear the story about maybe being blocked to do this, but here we have a power and energy type sources that are not modeled into all this about energy. We come up with the story that you have the right to go be off the grid, and you're surrounded by one. Now, I'd like to finally get the judge down to talk about this one. We're bathed in energy, we just haven't figured out how to get at it. Australian student confirms giant plasma tubes are floating above the Earth. There's energy conduits all around this Earth. That if we really wanted to be serious about no carbon, the smart brains would be being paid money to tap into these energies. Astronomers have for the first time captured visual evidence of the existence of tubular plasma structures in the inner layers of the magnetosphere surrounding the Earth. Those have a frequency, folks. They're inductive. For over 60 years, scientists believed, folks, this is all we're paying people to believe. These structures existed, but imaging them for the first time, we've provided visual evidence that they are really there. They're really there, folks. The discovery of the structure is important because they cause unwanted signal distortions that could, as one example, affect our civilian and military satellite-based navigation systems. So we need to understand them. The plasma structures are explained in a clip that will be part of the link. The region of space around the Earth occupied by its magnetic field, called the magnetosphere, is filled with plasma, created by the atmosphere being ionized by sunlight. If you didn't think we were full of energy and don't know how to get at it, how stupid are we? And the scientists only believe they get out there. They don't even know that they're there to mess with. They don't like it when they mess with their military machines, though, right? So now it becomes important. Why would that be? Because we're a warring, fallen people. We haven't figured out how to get off the revolution. And we allow people into office that are going to continue it. As I talked about Obama. And I talked about the Confederate flag when I started the broadcast. And I talked about the fact that that flag came down 2 days after Jade Helm stopped, and it sure seemed to me like maybe that was the declaration of war again. Civil War 2.0, what I told you Obama would put on this country, just because of the symbol that he was and is. And the South ought to rise again, but it hasn't. And I don't know that it is capable. But I found very interesting, about the same time that come up, right about a month before that. Supreme Court, Texas can refuse to issue Confederate flag license plate. Now, it's interesting how they decided this. The Supreme Court on Thursday upheld Texas's refusal to issue a license plate bearing the Confederate battle flag, rejecting free speech challenge. It's not free speech. So I looked at that and said, well, what's going to come up in the news that what they're attacking the Confederate flag for? Well, we found out a month later. The court said a 5-4 ruling that Texas can limit the content of license plates because they are state property and not the equivalent of bumper stickers. So that's as much as I wanted to read for you. They are state property. The license plates are state property. And you attach it to your property. How'd you do that? The application. You went and asked to have it done to you. The bigger question is if you hadn't done that. And if you don't do that, why are you worried about what your plate looks like? But the state's property can be determined by the state. This case was very interesting. Even though it had the Confederate battle flag, that it was not going to be, that the state of Texas, of all places, would not put that up. That alone was kind of interesting. But then they had the admission that the license plates is state property. And you complain about whether or not how you're being treated. What about your property, folks? You've put it into the state. You did that by an application. Applique. You stick it to yourself. I don't know how many years I've been saying this. The bigger question is, can you defend against having to do it? That's going to be a different trail. I think it can be done. It's not being done correctly as far as I can tell. I was hoping to get to that mode here shortly after I started to move the mining law forward, but it became so apparent that law would not be respected and property was no longer respected, and certainly not by the bar. And we see now today it's pretty obvious that this has become a different and longer trail to traverse. That this is state property, and you have to ask, well, what happened? Well, what happened is you asked for it. You filled out an application. They're state property, and you don't have free speech on it because it's not yours. Pretty simple. And so all the time, except for the proof that this is state property. It's not your car that's a state property. It's what that license tells the legality about. That you have put an application on the use of that vehicle, in other words, the use of the highway, that's different than the underlying granted use. And the evidence of which is that plate or the sticker or the license or the insurance or everything else they ask you. Now, when you tell them you don't have any of that, or they stop you because you don't have one, now you better be able to have your terminology about the fraud against you, about their imposition, their fraudulent imposition, their theft by extortion, imposition of a traffic condition upon you when you're actually only utilizing the highway as disposed. That's a different battle. Now you're going to find the warrior up. You're going to find the occupier, and you're going to see how brutal it can get. And that's where you start learning. You better start learning on how and what Tom Halen figured out, and what you're going to have to figure out. And then once you learn that, you'll begin to fight the battle. You'll be good enough to fight the battle. And it's a long one. So we can learn helplessness, or we can take responsibility and learn the lessons we were shielded from and protected from, so we wouldn't stand up and take the responsibility. We can reside in a helplessness that we have learned, or we can understand we've learned that helplessness and unlearn the helplessness, knowing that when we do so, we're going to come up against the handlers that put us there. And they don't like to give up the power. And they are controlled by other people, and they'll justify what they are doing against us. And that goes deep, 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 and puts us right back to what is. It consider what I said earlier about the possibility and probability of what is, how deep it's gone, how many millennia it's been imposed upon the people of this earth and this planet, and how it's time today to throw it off because they're bringing it to us in September. Thank you for tuning in today. Donate as you can to keep the servers running at reallibertymedia.com, worldtruth.org. Thank you to UCYD for carrying the broadcast and the FM broadcasters. Take care. I'll talk with you next week.
Well, that's another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.
That's what opening up a can of whoop-ass feels like.
Son.